The gavel's crack split the air like thunder, silencing the murmurs that had filled the chamber moments before. What was about to unfold wasn't merely another congressional hearing. It was a collision of fundamental American principles, a battle over who truly wielded power in a nation increasingly divided. Representative Jamie Raskin stood, his shoulders squared beneath the weight of constitutional crisis, prepared to face the mega representatives who sought to dismantle judicial independence. The air crackled with tension as the cameras focused, capturing a moment that would reveal the deepest fault lines in American democracy. Stay with us. This isn't just political theater. It's the front line of a constitutional war. The hearing room of the House Judiciary Committee was a theater of power, designed with its elevated dais where members sat bathed in the harsh fluorescent lighting that cast sharp shadows across their faces. American flags flanked the chairman's seat, their fabric still and silent, as if they too were holding their breath for what was to come. Camera operators positioned themselves strategically around the room, their equipment focused on capturing every micro-expression, every tightened jaw, every momentary flash of anger or triumph. The mahogany panels that lined the walls seemed to absorb the tension in the room, storing it like a battery waiting to discharge. Microphones stood ready before each seat, silver sentinels waiting to amplify the coming storm. The gallery was packed, the audience a mosaic of lobbyists, staffers, journalists, and concerned citizens, some leaning forward in anticipation, others with arms folded defensively across their chests. Representative Jamie Raskin sat with the careful posture of a man prepared for battle, his notes arranged precisely before him, his fingers occasionally tapping the table's edge, the only outward sign of the righteous indignation building within him. Across the dais, the MAGA representatives projected confidence, some leaning back in their chairs with a casual arrogance that suggested they believed victory was already theirs. Chairman Darrell Issa maintained an appearance of neutral authority, though the slight tightness around his eyes betrayed his awareness of the explosive nature of the day's proceedings. The committee clerk sat nearby, head slightly bowed over the official record, a silent witness to democracy's latest test. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, unable to dispel the heat of the ideological confrontation about to unfold. This wasn't merely a room, it was a battlefield where the very meaning of American governance would be contested, where the boundaries between branches of government would be redrawn or reinforced. The atmosphere shifted as Representative Jim Jordan took the floor, his voice carrying the cadence of populist indignation. The room seemed to shrink around his words as he leaned into the microphone, his jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up, a calculated visual of the working man fighting against elitism. His eyes scanned the room with the intensity of a prosecutor who had already determined guilt. "Who decides? That's the fundamental question." Jordan's voice resonated through the chamber, carrying not just inquiry, but accusation. "Who gets to make the call? Is it the guy whose name was on the ballot? Or is it some bureaucrat? Is it the guy who got 77 million votes, or some district judge?" The narrator's gaze would have noted how Jordan's hand punctuated each question with a sharp, downward motion, as if physically driving his point into the consciousness of everyone present. His supporters among the committee nodded in rhythmic agreement, creating a visual chorus of affirmation. Jordan's face flushed slightly as he continued, his voice rising with each sentence, building momentum like a preacher at the pulpit. "The left always says, trust the bureaucrat, trust the judge. It's the Faucis, it's the Boasbergs who get to make the call. After all, they're the experts. They're smarter than we the people. They're smarter than all us hillbillies in flyover country who voted for President Trump. Trust them." The contempt in Jordan's voice was palpable, hanging in the air like smoke. His supporters among the committee exchanged knowing glances, while Democrats maintained carefully neutral expressions, though some couldn't help but betray their disagreement with subtle shifts in posture or tightened jaw muscles. "That's not how it works," Jordan declared, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow commanded more attention than his previous exclamations. "We, the people, have the power." The statement lingered in the room, a gauntlet thrown down between competing visions of American democracy, one that elevated majority rule above all else, and another that saw the courts as the essential guardian of constitutional rights. Jordan settled back, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth suggesting satisfaction, as if he had not just made an argument but established an unassailable truth. Throughout Jordan's speech, Raskin had remained still, his eyes never leaving Jordan, absorbing each word not as mere rhetoric but as evidence for the constitutional case he was preparing to make. His hand occasionally made brief notes, the pen moving with the precision of a legal mind cataloging fallacies for future dismantling. The muscles around his eyes tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of his growing resolve to defend the institution being maligned before him. The air in the room seemed to shift as Representative Jamie Raskin rose to speak, as if the atmosphere itself was responding to the gravitational pull of constitutional crisis. Unlike Jordan's combative stance, Raskin stood with the quiet confidence of a constitutional scholar preparing to deliver a necessary lesson. His voice, when it came, carried the measured cadence of someone who had spent a lifetime in courtrooms and classrooms defending democratic principles. Why have 34 federal judges from 11 different districts with a combined 474 years of service on the bench, judges appointed by Presidents Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump, entered 57 different preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders against President Trump and Elon Musk's executive orders and actions? Raskin's question hung in the air, rhetorical yet demanding an answer. The statistics themselves transformed the atmosphere. No longer was this a debate about abstract principles. Raskin had quantified the extraordinary nature of the legal resistance to the administration. His eyes scanned the room, meeting the gaze of colleagues on both sides, refusing to allow anyone the comfort of avoiding the magnitude of what was occurring. The Republican members shifted slightly in their seats, discomfort evident in their posture as the sheer number of judicial interventions was laid bare. Raskin continued, his voice gaining strength not through volume, but through moral clarity. "Well, the majority says it's because these are radical judges, and they lead off as our good Chairman Issa did with Judge Jeb Boasberg, the Chief Judge of the District Court of the District of Columbia." His hand gestured toward Chairman Issa, acknowledgement rather than accusation, before continuing to describe Boasberg's injunction against the mass roundup and deportation of immigrants to an infamous El Salvador prison in peacetime without any due process at all, allegedly under the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. A statute explicitly limited to wartime and military invasion. As Raskin spoke, the room's division became physically manifest. Democratic staffers leaned forward, some nodding in solemn agreement, while Republican aides exchanged whispers and passed notes. Journalists' pens moved rapidly across notepads, capturing the building tension between opposing constitutional worldviews. The narrative took a human turn, as Raskin's voice softened slightly, though losing none of its intensity. "Some of our colleagues have been railing against Judge Boasberg for ordering the planes to be turned around. They say those planes were filled with terrorists." His eyes found the Texas representative briefly. "I think my good friend from Texas said, well, here's one person of many who wasn't a terrorist on that flight, or a gangbanger. His name's Kilmer Garcia." The chamber grew still as Raskin recounted Garcia's story. A Marylander, married to a U.S. citizen, father to a 5-year-old son with autism. Raskin's hands, usually animated during his speeches, rested flat against the table as he described how Garcia was shackled and put on that airplane and shipped off to the torturers of El Salvador without ever having the benefit of those two most beautiful words in the English language, due process. Several Democratic members visibly winced at the description. Even some Republican staffers looked down at their notes, uncomfortable with the human cost being laid bare. Raskin's voice took on a quality of controlled outrage as he emphasized, "He never saw a judge. Nobody ever told him what he was being charged for. Nobody ever told him that there were any charges against him, and he was sent to a mega prison run by the self-proclaimed dictator of El Salvador." Raskin paused, allowing the weight of the injustice to settle over the room. "And yesterday, you know what happened, Mr. Chairman? The Trump administration admitted that it had made a mistake." The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of reaction spreading across the chamber. He was not actually a gangbanger. He was not a criminal. It was all a mistake. The bitter irony coated Raskin's next words. "If there had been due process, maybe that would have been determined, but there wasn't." His voice hardened as he delivered the final blow of this segment. "The administration said there's nothing they can do about it now, because he's no longer in U.S. custody. This guy who lives in my state, married to a U.S. citizen with citizen children, he's stuck with the dictator of El Salvador." Throughout this recounting, Raskin had transformed from a congressman making an argument to a prosecutor presenting evidence of a constitutional crime. The story of Kilmer Garcia wasn't just an anecdote. It was Exhibit A in Raskin's case against executive overreach, a human face attached to abstract constitutional principles. The hearing room's temperature seemed to rise as Raskin moved to his next point, the fluorescent lights overhead casting his face in stark relief as he addressed the campaign against Judge Boasberg. His voice carried a new edge of urgency, matching the escalating threat to judicial independence he was about to describe. "Judge Boasberg," Raskin began, pausing briefly to ensure all attention was focused on what would follow. "Some of our colleagues want to impeach him." His eyes scanned the Republican side of the dais, challenging without directly accusing. "Look, some of our colleagues, they've got 4 wanted signs in the Cannon House office building with the names and faces of judges on them. They want to impeach them." The revelation sent a ripple of murmurs through the gallery. Journalists looked up from their notebooks, recognizing the significance of this escalation. Democratic members exchanged glances of concern, while several Republican representatives maintained carefully neutral expressions, neither confirming nor denying the accusation. "Now, they want to impeach Judge Boasberg," Raskin continued, his voice rising slightly before dropping to deliver a fact that undermined the partisan narrative. "Some of my colleagues should be alerted to this fact. Judge Boasberg was first named to the bench by President Bush." The statement hung in the air, challenging the simplistic partisan framing of judicial decisions. Raskin continued, his delivery measured but penetrating. "He was Justice Kavanaugh's roommate at Yale, known in legal quarters as a very conservative judge." Here Raskin paused, allowing the irony to land fully before concluding, "But they want to impeach him because he stood up for the rule of law." At this revelation, several Democratic members nodded emphatically, while some Republican faces registered surprise. Not all had been aware of Boasberg's conservative credentials. The complexity of the situation was etching itself into the consciousness of everyone present. This wasn't a simple partisan dispute, but something more fundamental to American governance. Raskin's posture straightened as he delivered his central thesis, his voice resonating with the conviction of a constitutional scholar defending first principles. Now, Democrats say all of these executive orders and actions are being struck down, not because these are radical left rogue judges, but because the judges, regardless of who appointed them, are doing their jobs. He leaned slightly forward, his intensity increasing. If the number of decisions striking down Trump illegality is unprecedented today, it's only because the sheer number of illegal acts committed in the first 100 days is unprecedented. America has never seen anything like it before in our entire history. The accusation landed like a thunderclap in the chamber. Some Republican members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others maintained expressions of stoic disagreement. Democratic staffers exchanged glances that mixed vindication with concern over the constitutional implications Raskin was outlining. Trump and Musk have been systematically violating the Constitution and breaking the law, Raskin continued, his voice growing more forceful. To trample the rights of the people and steal our data, fire excellent federal workers en masse, and dismantle congressionally created government agencies and programs from the VA and Medicaid to NOAA, NIH, and Social Security, which Elon Musk called, quote, the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. His gaze found Chairman Jordan briefly as he shifted topics, addressing the earlier argument about electoral mandates. And yes, I've got to tell my friend Chairman Jordan that even if you campaign on doing something unconstitutional, like naming people kings and queens or stealing other people's money, no, that doesn't make it constitutional, even if you campaigned on it. Several Democratic members nodded in agreement, while some Republicans maintained expressions of skepticism. Raskin's voice took on the quality of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument as he summarized the gravity of the situation. Anyone who's read any of the decisions knows that what we're witnessing today is a matchless constitutional crime spree by a rogue president and his Doge enforcer, a government contractor who has pocketed $38 billion from the taxpayers, multiples more than he has ever even claimed to have saved us. As Raskin cataloged the constitutional violations, Article 1 powers usurped, First Amendment free speech rights violated, Fifth Amendment due process rights ignored, Sixth Amendment counsel rights trampled. The weight of these accumulated offenses settled over the chamber like a dark cloud. He was no longer just a congressman making partisan points. He had become democracy's advocate, pleading its case before the court of public opinion. The room grew quieter as Raskin reached what many recognized as the most fundamental constitutional challenge posed by the administration. His voice took on a reverential quality as he invoked the 14th Amendment, a cornerstone of American citizenship and equality, won through civil war and enshrined in blood. Now, out of this mountain of cases, which I can only surmise our colleagues have not read, Raskin began, his implication that opponents were speaking from ignorance landing like a subtle jab. Let me zero in on Trump's executive order contradicting the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which says that any person born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof is a citizen of the United States. As he recited the amendment's text, several Democratic members mouthed the words along with him, a silent chorus affirming the sanctity of this constitutional provision. Republican members remained still, though some seemed uncomfortable with the direct constitutional challenge being laid before them. Raskin's eyes gleamed with the intensity of someone defending not just legal principles, but the very foundation of American identity, as he continued. Trump got struck down by a Reagan judge, a Biden judge, an Obama judge, and a Bush judge. The list of appointments spanning decades and administrations from both parties hung in the air, evidence that this wasn't partisan justice, but constitutional consensus. The Reagan judge said, quote, "I've been on the bench for 4 decades. I can't remember another case where the question presented is as clear as this one. This is a blatantly unconstitutional order. Blatantly." Raskin emphasized the word blatantly, allowing its force to resonate through the chamber. "This is from a Reagan judge." His gaze swept across the Republican side of the dais as he addressed their fundamental misunderstanding of executive authority. "Now, my colleagues seem to think that an executive order is greater than a law or the Constitution itself, but an executive order cannot trump a federal statute, much less the Constitution." Several Democratic members nodded vigorously at this point, while Republican faces remained impassive, though some aides could be seen making notes. Raskin's voice took on the quality of a constitutional law professor delivering an essential lesson as he explained, "An executive order is just an order to the executive bureaucracy to follow a policy unless and until it's countermanded by law, by the courts." The simplicity and clarity of this explanation cut through the political posturing, reducing the debate to its essential legal principles. As he spoke, the camera operators shifted their focus between Raskin and the Republican members he was implicitly criticizing. The visual contrast was striking. Raskin animated by constitutional conviction, several Republicans maintaining poker faces that revealed nothing of their thoughts. The gallery remained transfixed, recognizing that fundamental questions about American governance were being debated in real time. Raskin's demeanor shifted subtly as he moved to his next point, a historian now entering the record with evidence of historical norms being violated. His voice carried both warning and lament as he placed current events in their proper historical context. "Many of our colleagues are following Trump and Musk in calling for impeachment," he began, the accusation hanging in the air briefly before he provided the historical benchmark against which this extraordinary step should be measured. "Right now, there have been only 15 federal judges impeached in all of American history, always for serious professional misconduct, like taking bribes, stealing from the court, or habitual drunkenness. Not even occasional drunkenness, habitual drunkenness on the bench." The specificity of the historical examples brought a few nervous smiles to some faces in the gallery, but the gravity of Raskin's point was not lost on anyone. His voice grew more solemn as he emphasized, "Congress has never defined a doctrinal or interpretive disagreement as a high crime and misdemeanor, much less when the judge's reasoning was airtight correct." The fluorescent lights seemed to intensify as Raskin introduced an extraordinary development: the intervention of the Supreme Court's Chief Justice. The spreading movement to impeach and attack judges is so alarming that Chief Justice Roberts issued a rare statement last week. The mention of Roberts, a conservative Chief Justice appointed by President Bush, brought complete silence to the chamber, as everyone recognized the significance of such an unusual step. "For more than 2 centuries," Raskin quoted, giving Roberts' words the weight they deserved, "it's been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision." The statement hung in the air, a rebuke from the head of the judicial branch himself. Raskin acknowledged Chairman Issa with a brief nod. The proper response, of course, is to appeal the decision. And to be fair, Chairman Issa expressed his strong disapproval of these wanted posters yesterday in the Rules Committee. This moment of bipartisan agreement, a recognition that certain lines should not be crossed, created a brief bridge across the partisan divide that had characterized the hearing thus far. But Raskin's expression darkened as he turned to the consequences of the rhetorical assault on judges. Now, for some members, talk of impeaching these so-called rogue judges is just fun and games, but the vicious assault, the vicious rhetorical assault on the judiciary, has turned into something more sinister in certain quarters. Actual violent threats, bomb threats, direct intimidation. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Raskin detailed the harassment campaign. Judge Boasberg, the Bush appointee, must endure scandalous online attacks and insults by President Trump and Elon Musk and their followers. Democratic members' expressions reflected concern, while Republican faces showed varying degrees of discomfort, some clearly troubled by these developments, others maintaining neutral expressions. Raskin's voice carried controlled outrage as he continued. Even worse, the campaign of vilification has spread to Judge Boasberg's family, including outrageous attacks on his daughter, who has had her photo and her place of work posted on social media by Elon Musk to his 290 million followers. A subtle but noticeable reaction spread through the chamber, several members from both parties shifting in their seats, discomfort evident on their faces. Family members were supposed to be off-limits in political warfare. This escalation crossed a line that even many partisan warriors recognized should remain uncrossed. These threats follow an actual bomb threat made to the residence of Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Raskin added, strategically mentioning a conservative justice to emphasize that the danger transcended partisan lines. And there are numerous other threats taking place today. And of course, we've seen threats and actual violence and murders take place in the past. The specter of political violence hung over the chamber like a shadow, reminding everyone present of the stakes involved when democratic norms erode and institutions are delegitimized. Even members who had been most aggressive in their criticism of the judiciary seemed momentarily sobered by the potential consequences of their rhetoric. As Raskin approached his conclusion, a palpable shift occurred in the chamber. The partisan temperature that had defined much of the hearing gave way to something more fundamental, a question not of policy disagreements, but of constitutional commitment. Raskin's posture straightened, his voice taking on the quality of a statesman rather than a partisan, as he issued direct challenges to his colleagues. I call on my colleagues right now to call off the campaign to impeach federal judges for doing their jobs, he declared, each word measured and deliberate. The direct challenge left no room for equivocation. Members would either stand with judicial independence or against it. Several Democratic members nodded in solemn agreement, while Republican reactions varied from subtle discomfort to stone-faced neutrality. The gallery watched intently, recognizing that this moment transcended ordinary political theater. I call on them to demand that the Trump administration comply with all judicial orders while appealing whichever ones they want to appeal, Raskin continued, offering the constitutional off-ramp. Appeal, not defiance, was the proper response to unfavorable judicial decisions. His voice carried the weight of centuries of constitutional precedent, invoking not partisan advantage, but the fundamental rules of democratic governance. Raskin's expression hardened slightly as he added, and to demand the return of people unlawfully taken to El Salvador on that so-called plane full of gangbangers. The human cost of constitutional violations was not abstract. It was measured in lives disrupted, families separated, individuals subjected to conditions they did not deserve. The chamber grew completely still as Raskin delivered his final challenge, his voice resonating with both moral and constitutional authority. And I especially call on them today to denounce all violent threats, doxing, online vilification, and threats against our judges." He paused, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room before delivering his closing statement. A reminder of the committee's historical role as guardian of America's legal system. "This is the Judiciary Committee of the United States House of Representatives, and we should act like it." With those words, Raskin yielded back his time to the chairman. The microphone may have been silenced, but the echo of his constitutional challenge reverberated through the chamber. Democratic members looked at their Republican colleagues, many with expressions that asked a simple question: which side of this constitutional line will you choose? Republican reactions varied, some avoiding eye contact, others maintaining expressions of disagreement, a few looking thoughtful, perhaps reconsidering positions in light of Raskin's appeal to constitutional principle over partisan advantage. The gallery remained hushed, journalists scribbling frantically to capture not just what had been said, but the weight of the constitutional moment they had witnessed. The gavel fell, marking the official end of Raskin's testimony, but not the constitutional crisis it had illuminated. As members gathered their papers and aides leaned in to whisper assessments, the fundamental question Raskin had posed hung in the air, unanswered but unavoidable. Would America's elected representatives defend the independent judiciary that had served as the guardian of constitutional rights for over 2 centuries, or would they sacrifice that independence on the altar of partisan advantage? The hearing room emptied gradually, but the constitutional battleground it represented remained. Cameras powered down, microphones were switched off, but the confrontation between executive power and judicial independence continued beyond those walls. In courtrooms where judges still issued injunctions against unconstitutional orders, in prisons where deportees like Cruz Kilmer Garcia awaited justice that might never come, and in the public square where Americans would ultimately decide which vision of their democracy would prevail. What had unfolded in that hearing room wasn't merely political theater, it was a defining moment in America's ongoing constitutional story, a chapter whose ending remained unwritten, dependent on whether enough public servants would choose constitutional duty over partisan loyalty. Raskin had made his stand. Now the nation waited to see who would stand with him.